The red sun of New Terra Colony was setting behind the massive fuel towers when Officer Marcus Brown started his evening patrol in the outer districts. The hover car hummed quietly as it moved through the empty streets where most people stayed inside after dark. Marcus had been working this beat for 3 years now, and he knew every corner of this place where trouble always seemed to find a way to start. The fuel station sat at the edge of the settlement, like a bright island in the growing darkness. Big ships from other worlds stopped here to fill their tanks before heading back to space. Local people came here too in their small hover cars and ground vehicles. The place never really closed, and that made it a spot where problems happened. Marcus pulled his patrol car into the station lot and got out to walk around. His boots made soft sounds on the metal ground as he checked the area. Everything looked normal until he saw the man standing near Pump 7. The man was tall and moved with the kind of smooth grace that made Marcus think of the enhanced humans who lived in the better parts of the colony. His skin was dark, and he wore the kind of clean clothes that cost more money than most people in the outer districts had. What caught Marcus' attention most was the way the man held himself like he belonged anywhere he went. Marcus watched as the man finished filling his vehicle and walked toward the payment terminal. The scanner beeped once, then made a harsh sound that meant something was wrong. The man tried again and got the same result. Marcus decided to walk over and see what was happening. The man looked up as Marcus approached. His eyes were bright and intelligent and showed no fear at seeing a police officer. Most people in the outer districts got nervous when they saw Marcus coming, but this man just smiled in a friendly way. Marcus looked at the payment terminal screen. The words "identification error" flashed in red letters. He had seen this before when people tried to use fake identification chips, or when the chips got damaged somehow. Marcus asked to see the man's identification chip. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small silver device that looked different from the standard chips most people carried. It was newer and had extra features that Marcus did not recognize. When Marcus ran the chip through his portable scanner, the device made confused sounds and displayed a message that said the chip format was not in the local database. This happened sometimes with people who came from other colonies, but it also happened when people tried to use fake identification. Marcus looked more closely at the man and noticed other things that seemed strange. The man's clothes were too nice for someone who would be in the outer districts at night. His hover car was an expensive model that most people could not afford. Even his way of speaking was different, like he had spent time in schools that taught proper language. The man explained that he worked at the research facility on the other side of the colony and was heading home after a long day. He said his identification chip was a newer model that sometimes had trouble with older scanners. He spoke calmly and tried to be helpful, but Marcus had heard stories like this before from people who were trying to hide something. Marcus asked the man to step away from his vehicle while he ran a more detailed check. The man did what he was asked without arguing, but Marcus could see that he was starting to look worried. Most innocent people got worried when police started asking questions, so that did not prove anything, one way or the other. The enhanced scanner in Marcus' patrol car was supposed to be able to read any identification chip made in the last 20 years. When Marcus tried to scan the man's chip again, the machine took longer than usual and finally displayed a message that said the chip contained encrypted data that could not be verified locally. This was the kind of result that Marcus had been trained to treat as suspicious. People who had nothing to hide did not usually carry identification chips with encrypted data. The man could be a criminal trying to hide his real identity, or someone from another colony who was here without proper permission. Marcus made the decision to place the man under arrest for carrying false identification. The man tried to explain that his chip was issued by the colonial government and contained security features because of his job, but Marcus had heard similar stories before. As Marcus put restraints on the man, he noticed that the man did not fight back or try to run away. Most guilty people tried to resist when they got arrested, but this man just looked disappointed, like he had expected something different to happen. The man said that he had an important meeting the next morning and asked if there was someone he could call to verify his identity. Marcus told him that he could make calls from the detention center after he was processed. That was the standard procedure, and Marcus was not going to break rules just because this man seemed polite. Marcus put the man in the back of his patrol car and started driving toward the detention center. During the ride, the man sat quietly and looked out the window at the lights of the colony. He did not seem angry or scared like most people did when they got arrested. Instead, he seemed to be thinking about something important. At the detention center, Marcus filled out the arrest report and listed the charges as carrying false identification and suspicious behavior. The man was processed like any other arrestee and put in a holding cell until his case could be reviewed. Before Marcus left, the man said that everything would be sorted out in the morning and that Marcus should not worry about making a mistake. Marcus finished his shift and went home, thinking that he had done good police work. He had found someone who was probably trying to deceive the system and had stopped them before they could cause problems. The outer districts were full of people who bent the rules, and it was his job to keep them in line. The next morning, Marcus got ready for his own appointment at the courthouse. He had been ordered to appear before a judge because some people had filed complaints about his work. Marcus was not worried because he knew he always followed proper procedures and treated everyone fairly according to the law. Marcus put on his best uniform and made sure everything looked perfect. He wanted to make a good impression on the judge and show that he was a serious police officer who took his job seriously. As he drove to the courthouse, Marcus thought about all the arrests he had made and felt confident that he had nothing to worry about. Marcus Brown walked through the main entrance of the Colonial Justice Center, feeling confident about his hearing. The building was one of the newest on New Terra Colony, with clean white walls and large windows that let in plenty of light. Marcus had been here before as a witness in other cases, but never as the person being questioned. He checked in with the clerk at the front desk, who looked at his paperwork and told him to wait in the hallway outside courtroom 3. Marcus found a bench near the door and sat down to review his notes about the complaints that had been filed against him. He still believed that everything he had done was correct and legal. The complaints came from 3 different people over the past month. The first was from an enhanced human named Carl Davis, who claimed that Marcus had stopped him for no good reason and searched his vehicle without permission. The second complaint came from a woman named Linda Torres, who said that Marcus had used too much force when arresting her son for a minor offense. The third complaint was from an elderly enhanced human named Peter Kim, who said that Marcus had treated him with disrespect during a routine traffic stop. Marcus remembered all 3 incidents and felt sure that he had followed proper procedures each time. Carl Davis had been driving in a suspicious manner, and when Marcus stopped him, the man had acted nervous and evasive. Linda Torres' son had resisted arrest, and Marcus had used only the amount of force necessary to control the situation. Peter Kim had been rude and argumentative during his traffic stop, and Marcus had simply responded with appropriate firmness. The door to courtroom 3 opened and a bailiff called Marcus' name. He stood up and walked into the courtroom, feeling ready to defend his actions. The courtroom was smaller than he had expected, with wooden benches for observers and a raised platform where the judge would sit. Marcus took his seat at the defendant table and looked around the room. His supervisor, Lieutenant Rodriguez, was sitting in the front row, along with a representative from the police union. Several other people were scattered around the courtroom, but Marcus did not recognize most of them. The bailiff called for everyone to stand as the judge entered the courtroom. Marcus stood up and turned toward the judge's bench, expecting to see one of the older judges who usually handled police misconduct cases. Instead, he saw the man he had arrested at the fuel station the night before. The man was now wearing black judicial robes and walked with the same calm confidence that Marcus had noticed before. He took his seat behind the bench and looked out at the courtroom with professional composure. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized what had happened. Judge Ethan Clark looked down at the papers in front of him without showing any sign that he recognized Marcus. His voice was clear and formal as he called the court to session and began reading the case details. Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing as the judge explained the charges against him in the same calm tone he had used at the fuel station. Marcus looked around the courtroom to see if anyone else had noticed what was happening, but everyone seemed focused on the normal business of the hearing. Lieutenant Rodriguez was taking notes, and the union representative was reviewing his files. Nobody seemed to think there was anything unusual about the situation. Judge Clark began by explaining the hearing process and the rights that Marcus had as the subject of the complaints. He spoke about the importance of police accountability and the need for officers to treat all citizens with respect and fairness. As he talked, Marcus began to understand that this was not just any judge, but someone who really understood the law. The first witness called was Carl Davis, who testified about his encounter with Marcus. He described being stopped while driving home from work and having his vehicle searched without any explanation. He said that Marcus had treated him like a criminal, even though he had done nothing wrong and had cooperated fully with all requests. Judge Clark asked detailed questions about the stop that showed he understood both police procedures and citizens' rights. He wanted to know exactly what Marcus had said when he stopped the vehicle and what legal justification he had given for the search. Carl Davis answered clearly, and Marcus began to see that his actions might not have been as correct as he had thought. The second witness was Linda Torres, who told the court about her son's arrest. She described how Marcus had used physical force even after her son had stopped resisting and was trying to comply with orders. She said that Marcus had seemed angry and had treated her son more roughly than necessary. Judge Clark asked about the specific type of force that had been used and whether Marcus had followed proper escalation procedures. Linda Torres provided details that made Marcus uncomfortable because he realized that his memory of the incident might not be completely accurate. He had been frustrated that day and might have used more force than the situation required. The third witness was Peter Kim, who spoke about being treated with disrespect during his traffic stop. He described how Marcus had talked down to him and made comments about enhanced humans that were inappropriate and unprofessional. He said that Marcus had seemed to have already decided he was guilty before even checking his identification. Judge Clark listened carefully to each witness and asked questions that revealed patterns in Marcus' behavior. It became clear that all three incidents involved enhanced humans, and that Marcus had treated them differently than he would have treated regular humans. The judge took notes and referred to legal precedents that showed deep knowledge of discrimination law. During a short break, Marcus tried to process what was happening. The man he had arrested was not just any citizen, but a judge who was now reviewing his conduct. Marcus realized that his arrest at the fuel station had been completely wrong and that he was now facing someone who had direct personal experience with his mistakes. When the hearing resumed, Judge Clark called Marcus to testify on his own behalf. Marcus walked to the witness stand feeling nervous for the first time since arriving at the courthouse. He looked up at the judge and saw the same intelligent eyes that had looked at him the night before at the fuel station. Judge Clark administered the oath and asked Marcus to state his name and position for the record. Marcus answered in a voice that was less confident than usual. The judge then began asking questions about his training and his understanding of proper police procedures. The questions were fair, but thorough, and Judge Clark showed no emotion as he listened to Marcus' answers. He asked about the legal standards for vehicle searches and the proper use of force during arrests. He asked about training regarding discrimination and the treatment of enhanced humans. Marcus found himself admitting that he might not have followed all procedures correctly in the three incidents. The judge's questions helped him see that his actions had been influenced by assumptions and biases that he had not recognized before. He began to understand that enhanced humans faced discrimination that he had never really thought about. As the hearing continued, Marcus realized that Judge Clark was giving him a fair chance to explain his actions despite what had happened at the fuel station. The judge was following legal procedures exactly and was not allowing personal feelings to influence his handling of the case. The final witness was Lieutenant Rodriguez, who testified about Marcus' record and training. He described Marcus as a dedicated officer who had always followed orders but admitted that recent complaints suggested problems that needed to be addressed. He recommended additional training and closer supervision rather than severe punishment. Judge Clark listened to all the testimony and announced that he would review the evidence before making his decision. He scheduled another hearing for the following week where he would announce his ruling. As everyone prepared to leave the courtroom, Marcus wondered what would happen next and whether his career in law enforcement was over. The week between hearings passed slowly for Marcus Brown. He spent his days on desk duty at the police station while his case was being reviewed. Other officers treated him differently now that word had spread about his hearing. Some offered support while others seemed to avoid him completely. Marcus used the time to think about what had happened and to read about the laws governing police conduct. He discovered legal concepts that he had never learned properly during his training. The more he read, the more he understood that his actions might have violated citizens' rights in ways he had never considered. Lieutenant Rodriguez called Marcus into his office 3 days before the next hearing. He explained that the police department was taking the complaint seriously and that Marcus' future with the force would depend on the judge's decision. He also mentioned that Judge Clark had a reputation for being fair, but strict about civil rights violations. Marcus asked his supervisor what he knew about Judge Clark and learned some surprising facts. The judge had been one of the first enhanced humans to graduate from the Colonial Law School. He had helped write many of the laws that governed relations between regular humans and enhanced humans. He was also known for his work with alien species and had been involved in establishing legal frameworks for interspecies cooperation. This information made Marcus even more nervous about facing Judge Clark again. He realized that he had arrested one of the most important legal minds on the colony and that his ignorance of the law was about to be exposed in front of someone who understood it better than almost anyone. And the morning of the second hearing, Marcus arrived at the courthouse early and sat in the same hallway where he had waited before. This time he felt much less confident and much more aware of how serious his situation had become. He watched other people coming and going and wondered how many of them knew about his case. When the bailiff called his name, Marcus walked into the courtroom with heavy steps. He noticed that there were more observers this time, including several people who looked like they might be reporters or legal professionals. Word about the case seemed to have spread beyond the police department. Judge Clark entered the courtroom wearing the same black robes and carrying himself with the same professional dignity. He took his seat behind the bench and called the court to session without looking directly at Marcus. His voice was clear and authoritative as he began to review the evidence that had been presented during the first hearing. The judge spoke about each of the 3 complaints in detail and explained the legal standards that applied to police conduct in each situation. He quoted specific laws and court precedents that Marcus had never heard of before. It became clear that Judge Clark had spent considerable time researching the case and preparing his analysis. Judge Clark explained that police officers had broad authority to protect public safety, but that this authority came with strict limitations designed to protect citizens' rights. He said that the balance between police power and individual freedom was one of the most important principles in colonial law. The judge then began his analysis of Marcus' conduct in the first incident involving Carl Davis. He explained that vehicle searches required either probable cause or consent and that neither had been present during the traffic stop. He quoted the exact legal language that defined probable cause and showed how Marcus' actions had fallen short of legal requirements. Marcus listened with growing discomfort as Judge Clark systematically dismantled the justifications he had given for his actions. The judge showed that Marcus had made assumptions based on Carl Davis' appearance and behavior, rather than on actual evidence of wrongdoing. He explained how these assumptions had led to violations of constitutional rights. The analysis of the second incident involving Linda Torres' son was even more damaging. Judge Clark reviewed police training materials about the use of force and showed that Marcus had escalated the situation beyond what was necessary or appropriate. He explained that young people often acted nervous around police without that meaning they were guilty of anything. The judge spoke about the psychological impact of excessive force on citizens and their families. He explained that trust between police and the community depended on officers using only the minimum force necessary to maintain safety. He said that Marcus' actions had damaged that trust and had potentially put other officers at risk. The third incident involving Peter Kim revealed patterns of discriminatory behavior that Judge Clark analyzed with particular care. He explained that enhanced humans had the same rights as regular humans and that their modifications did not make them less deserving of respect. He said that comments about genetic enhancement during official police interactions were inappropriate and potentially illegal. Judge Clark spoke about the history of discrimination on New Terra Colony and explained how law enforcement played a crucial role in either perpetuating or preventing unfair treatment of minority groups. He said that police officers had a special responsibility to treat all citizens equally regardless of their genetic status or appearance. As the judge continued his analysis, Marcus began to see his own behavior in a completely different way. Actions that had seemed reasonable and necessary when he performed them now appeared biased and potentially harmful. He realized that his training had been incomplete and that his attitudes had been shaped by prejudices he had never acknowledged. Judge Clark then addressed the broader implications of the case. He explained that police misconduct had consequences beyond the immediate victims and could affect the entire colony's relationship with alien species who were watching how humans treated each other. He said that the galactic community judged human civilization partly based on how fairly they administered justice. The judge spoke about reports he had received from alien observers who were monitoring human colonies throughout the sector. He explained that species like the Zephyrians and the Karathi valued justice and equality highly, and that human behavior in these areas affected diplomatic relationships and trade agreements. Marcus had never considered that his actions as a local police officer could have implications beyond New Terra Colony. The idea that alien species were watching and judging human civilization based on cases like his was both frightening and humbling. He began to understand that he was part of something much larger than he had realized. Judge Clark then turned his attention to the question of appropriate punishment for Marcus violations. He explained that the purpose of disciplinary action was not just to punish wrongdoing, but also to educate officers and deter future misconduct. He said that effective justice required balancing accountability with opportunities for redemption and growth. The judge reviewed similar cases from other colonies and explained how different approaches to police discipline had produced different results. He said that purely punitive measures often failed to change behavior, while educational approaches could lead to genuine improvement. He emphasized that the goal was to create better police officers rather than simply to remove bad ones. Judge Clark announced that he would take a brief recess to consider his options before announcing his decision. As people stood up and began talking quietly, Marcus remained in his seat feeling overwhelmed by everything he had heard. He realized that his understanding of police work and his role in the community had been fundamentally wrong. During the recess, Marcus thought about his childhood in the Earth slums where enhanced humans had seemed like privileged elites who looked down on regular people. He began to see how those early experiences had shaped his attitudes and influenced his behavior as a police officer. For the first time, he started to question beliefs he had held for most of his life. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached Marcus during the break and offered some words of encouragement. He said that Judge Clark seemed to be giving serious consideration to rehabilitation rather than simply ending Marcus' career. He advised Marcus to be prepared to accept responsibility for his mistakes and to show genuine willingness to change. When court resumed, Judge Clark looked directly at Marcus for the first time since the hearing had begun. His expression was serious but not hostile as he prepared to announce his decision about Marcus' future as a police officer on New Terra Colony. During the recess, Judge Ethan Clark walked to his chambers and closed the door behind him. The weight of his decision pressed down on him as he sat at his desk and looked out the window at the sprawling city of New Terra Colony. What appeared to be a simple case of police misconduct was actually something much more significant for humanity's future among the stars. Clark activated his secure communication terminal and reviewed the messages that had arrived during the hearing. 3 different alien species maintained diplomatic missions on New Terra, and all of them had been monitoring the proceedings through official channels. The implications of his decision would reach far beyond the colonial justice system. The first message came from Ambassador Cathara of the Zephyrian delegation. The Zephyrians were tall, graceful beings who valued justice and equality above all other principles. Their society had eliminated discrimination centuries ago, and they viewed it as a sign of primitive civilization. Cathara had written that the Zephyrians were watching the Marcus Brown case as an indicator of human moral development. Clark knew that Zephyrian support was crucial for human expansion into their sector of space. The Zephyrians controlled several key trade routes, and their approval was necessary for humans to establish new colonies in profitable systems. They had been impressed by human technology and adaptability, but remained concerned about human social problems. The second message came from war leader Thakmar of the Karathi military mission. The Karathi were a warrior species who respected strength and honor, but despised cruelty and abuse of power. They had been allies of humanity for 5 years, but their alliance was based on mutual respect rather than legal agreements. Thakmar had indicated that the Karathi were evaluating human leadership, qualities based on how they handled internal Conflicts. The Karathi had recently offered to share advanced military technology with human colonies, but only if humans proved they could maintain discipline and honor within their own ranks. The Marcus Brown case had become a test of whether human law enforcement could meet Karathi standards of warrior conduct. The third message was the most concerning and came from the Vailtar consensus mind. The Vailtar were a peaceful species that made decisions through collective consciousness, and they had little tolerance for injustice or oppression. Their message was brief but clear. They were reconsidering their support for human expansion based on reports of discrimination and police brutality. The Vailtar controlled the most advanced medical technology in the known galaxy, and their cooperation was essential for human colonies to treat diseases and genetic disorders. They had been willing to share their knowledge with humans, but only if humans demonstrated that they could treat all members of their society with compassion and fairness. Clark understood that his decision about Marcus Brown would send a message to all three species about human values and capabilities. If he was too lenient, alien observers might conclude that humans tolerated discrimination and abuse of authority. If he was too harsh, they might think that humans were unable to balance justice with mercy. More importantly, Clark had received a priority communication from the Galactic Council itself. Humanity had applied for permission to expand into the Andromeda Spiral, where vast resources and habitable worlds awaited development. The application was being reviewed by a committee that included representatives from 12 different species. The committee had specifically requested information about human internal governance and social justice systems. They wanted to know whether humans could be trusted to treat other species fairly if they expanded their territory. Recent reports about discrimination and civil rights violations on several human colonies had raised concerns among council members. Clark realized that the Marcus Brown case had become a symbol of human civilization's readiness for galactic citizenship. The decision he made would be studied by alien legal experts and would influence humanity's reputation throughout the galaxy. The pressure was enormous, but he knew that justice required him to follow the law regardless of political consequences. As Clark reviewed the case files, he thought about his own experiences as an enhanced human on New Terra Colony. He had faced discrimination and prejudice throughout his career, but had always believed that education and patience could overcome ignorance and fear. The Marcus Brown case was an opportunity to prove that human society could evolve and improve. Clark had not chosen genetic enhancement for vanity or privilege, but out of necessity. As a child, he had suffered from a rare genetic disease that would have killed him without medical intervention. The enhancements had not only saved his life, but had given him the intellectual capacity to study both human and alien law systems. His enhanced longevity meant that he would live for several centuries and would witness humanity's expansion across multiple star systems. His unique background made him one of the few humans qualified to serve as a bridge between different species and cultures. The responsibility was both an honor and a burden. Clark opened another secure file that contained intelligence reports about alien attitudes toward human expansion. The reports painted a complex picture of species that were impressed by human innovation, but concerned about human social problems. Several species had expressed willingness to work with humans, but only under careful supervision. The reports also revealed that some alien species were actively opposing human expansion. They viewed humans as potentially dangerous and unpredictable, based on their history of warfare and internal conflicts. These species were watching for any evidence that humans brought chaos and violence wherever they went. Clark knew that cases like Marcus Brown's provided ammunition for species that wanted to limit human expansion. They could point to police brutality and discrimination as evidence that humans were not ready for galactic citizenship. On the other hand, fair and effective justice could demonstrate human capacity for moral growth. The judge also considered the broader context of human development on New Terra Colony. The settlement was still young and was struggling to create a stable society that included both regular humans and enhanced humans. The decisions made in the next few years would establish precedents that would influence human civilization for centuries. Enhanced humans made up about 30% of the colonial population, and their numbers were growing rapidly. They possessed abilities that regular humans could not match, but they also faced resentment and fear from those who viewed genetic modification as unnatural or unfair. Creating harmony between these groups was essential for colonial success. Clark had seen similar tensions on other human colonies where discrimination had led to violence and social breakdown. Some colonies had split into separate communities for enhanced and regular humans, while others had established apartheid systems that violated basic human rights. New Terra Colony had the opportunity to do better, but only if leaders made wise decisions. The case also reflected broader questions about human identity and values in an age of genetic modification and alien contact. Traditional concepts of humanity were being challenged by new technologies and new relationships with non-human species. The law needed to evolve to address these challenges while preserving essential principles of justice and equality. Clark returned to his desk and began writing his decision. He knew that whatever he chose would be criticized by some people and praised by others. His job was not to satisfy everyone but to apply the law fairly and to set precedents that would serve justice in the long term. As he wrote, Clark thought about the young police officer whose future hung in the balance. Marcus Brown had made serious mistakes, but he was also a product of a society that had failed to prepare him for the complexities of modern colonial life. Justice required accountability, but it also required opportunities for redemption and growth. The judge looked out his window again at the city where humans and aliens worked together to build a new kind of civilization. The decisions made in his courtroom would help determine whether that civilization would be based on justice and equality or on prejudice and discrimination. The stakes could not be higher for Marcus Brown or for humanity itself. When Judge Clark returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than before. Marcus Brown sat at the defendant table looking pale and nervous, while observers filled most of the available seats. Word about the case had spread throughout the colony and people wanted to see how justice would be handled. Judge Clark took his seat and called the court back to session. Instead of immediately announcing his decision, he surprised everyone by saying that he wanted to hear additional testimony from both the defendant and the victims. He explained that understanding the full context of the case was essential for making a fair ruling. The judge called Marcus Brown to the witness stand again and asked him to explain his background and training. Marcus spoke quietly about growing up in the earth slums where enhanced humans were rare and often viewed with suspicion. He described a childhood of poverty and violence where survival often depended on quick judgments about potential threats. Marcus explained that his family had applied for genetic enhancement but had been rejected because they could not afford the expensive procedures. He had watched enhanced humans receive better jobs and opportunities, while regular humans like his family struggled to get by. These experiences had shaped his views about enhanced humans and their place in society. Judge Clark listened without interruption as Marcus described his journey from the earth slums to New Terra Colony. Marcus had joined the police force because he wanted to protect people and maintain order, but he admitted that his training had not prepared him for the complexities of colonial life. He had relied on instincts and assumptions that were often wrong. The judge asked Marcus about specific incidents involving enhanced humans and regular citizens. Marcus reluctantly admitted that he often treated enhanced humans with more suspicion than regular humans. He had assumed that their genetic modifications gave them unfair advantages and that they looked down on people like him. As Marcus testified, it became clear that his discriminatory behavior was not based on malice but on fear and misunderstanding. He had never taken the time to learn about enhanced humans or to question his assumptions about their motivations and character. His ignorance had led to violations of their rights and damage to community trust. Judge Clark then asked Marcus why he had arrested him at the fuel station. Marcus explained that the identification scanner had indicated a problem and that he had followed standard procedures for dealing with suspicious identification. He admitted that he had not tried very hard to resolve the problem peacefully because he had already decided that something was wrong. The judge pointed out that Marcus had made assumptions about him based on his appearance and behavior rather than giving him the benefit of the doubt. Marcus agreed that he had been influenced by prejudices that he had not recognized at the time. He said that he was beginning to understand how his actions had affected innocent people. Judge Clark then called Carl Davis back to the witness stand and asked him to describe his experiences as an enhanced human on New Terra Colony. Davis explained that enhanced humans faced constant suspicion and discrimination, despite being productive members of society. He said that police officers like Marcus Brown made life difficult for people who were just trying to work and raise their families. Davis described incidents where enhanced humans had been stopped by police for no apparent reason or had been treated as suspects when they were actually victims of crimes. He said that many enhanced humans avoided certain parts of the colony because they knew they would face harassment from law enforcement officers. The testimony revealed that Marcus Brown was not the only police officer who discriminated against enhanced humans. Davis described a pattern of biased law enforcement that affected the entire enhanced human community. He said that trust between enhanced humans and police had been damaged by years of unfair treatment. Judge Clark then called Linda Torres to testify about the impact of police misconduct on families and communities. Torres described how her son's arrest had traumatized her entire family and had made them afraid of police officers. She said that excessive force created fear and resentment that lasted long after the immediate incident was over. Torres explained that her son had been a good student who had never been in trouble before his encounter with Marcus Brown. The experience had changed his attitude toward authority and had made him suspicious of police officers. She worried that other young people would develop similar attitudes if police misconduct continued. The testimony showed that police misconduct had consequences beyond the immediate victims. It affected families, communities, and the relationship between law enforcement and the people they were supposed to protect. Judge Clark took notes as Torres described the long-term damage caused by officers who abused their authority. Peter Kim was the final witness, and his testimony was particularly powerful. As an elderly enhanced human, he had lived through the early days of genetic modification when discrimination was even more common than it was now. He described decades of fighting for equal rights and equal treatment under the law. Kim explained that progress had been slow and that cases like Marcus Brown's showed how much work remained to be done. He said that younger enhanced humans often lost hope when they faced discrimination from authority figures who were supposed to protect them. He worried that the colony would split into separate communities if these problems were not addressed. The elderly man also spoke about the impact of discrimination on the colony's relationship with alien species. He explained that aliens judged human civilization based on how fairly humans treated each other. Discrimination and police brutality sent a message that humans were not ready for galactic citizenship. After hearing all the testimony, Judge Clark announced that he wanted to share his own story before making his final decision. He explained that understanding his background was important for understanding his perspective on the case. The courtroom fell silent as the judge began to speak about his personal experiences. Judge Clark described his childhood illness and the genetic modifications that had saved his life. He explained that becoming enhanced had not been a choice made for privilege or advantage, but a medical necessity. Without the modifications, he would have died before his 10th birthday. The judge spoke about the discrimination he had faced as an enhanced human and the extra effort he had made to prove his worth to society. He had studied harder than his classmates and had worked longer hours than his colleagues to overcome prejudices and assumptions. Every achievement had required twice the effort that regular humans needed to make. Clark explained that his enhanced intellect and longevity had allowed him to study both human and alien legal systems. He had become an expert in interspecies law and had helped establish the legal frameworks that governed relations between humans and aliens on New Terra Colony. His unique background made him qualified to serve as a bridge between different communities. The judge also revealed that he had been contacted by alien observers who were monitoring the case. He explained that his decision would influence humanity's reputation throughout the galaxy and would affect future opportunities for expansion and cooperation. The stakes were much higher than anyone in the courtroom had realized. As Judge Clark finished his testimony, the courtroom remained silent. Everyone understood that they were witnessing something more than a simple police misconduct case. They were seeing a moment that would help define the future of human civilization among the stars. Marcus Brown looked directly at Judge Clark for the first time since the hearing had begun. He saw not an enemy or a threat, but a fellow human being who had overcome tremendous challenges to serve his community. For the first time, Marcus began to understand what he had really done when he arrested The judge at the fuel station. The judge announced that he was ready to make his decision about Marcus Brown's future as a police officer. The courtroom tension was almost unbearable, as everyone waited to hear how justice would be served in a case that had implications far beyond New Terra Colony. High above New Terra Colony in a secure communication chamber, Ambassador Cathara of the Zephyrian delegation watched the courtroom proceedings through a quantum link feed. The tall, graceful alien had been monitoring human legal processes for 3 years and had developed deep respect for Judge Clark's commitment to justice and fairness. Cathara's crystalline features reflected the blue light from the viewing screen as she observed Marcus Brown's testimony about his background and motivations. The Zephyrian had studied human psychology extensively and understood how environmental factors shaped individual behavior. She was impressed that Judge Clark was taking time to understand the root causes of the discrimination rather than simply punishing the symptoms. In Zephyrian society, discrimination based on genetic differences had been eliminated over 800 years ago through education and legal reforms. Cathara knew that humans were still early in their social development and that cases like this one represented important steps toward true equality. The way Judge Clark handled the situation would indicate whether humans were capable of moral growth. Cathara activated her communication device and sent a brief message to the Zephyrian High Council on the homeworld. She reported that the human judge was demonstrating wisdom and fairness that met Zephyrian standards for civilized behavior. She recommended continued support for human expansion into Zephyrian space, based on the proceedings she was observing. Meanwhile, in the Karathi military compound, war leader Thokmar reviewed the same proceedings with a different perspective. The massive warrior watched Judge Clark's methodical approach to justice and recognized qualities that Karathi culture valued highly. The judge showed strength through restraint and honor, through fairness, even when dealing with someone who had wronged him personally. Thokmar had been skeptical about human worthiness as military allies, because he had seen reports of police brutality and corruption from other human colonies. However, Judge Clark's handling of the Marcus Brown case demonstrated that some humans possessed the discipline and integrity that Karathi warriors respected. The war leader made notes about recommending closer cooperation with New Terra Colony. The Karathi had been testing human military leaders for months and had found most of them lacking in the honor and self-control that true warriors required. Judge Clark was showing that humans could rise above personal grievances to serve larger principles of justice. This was exactly the kind of leadership that the Karathi wanted to see in their allies. In the most secure section of the alien district, the Vailtar consensus mind processed the courtroom data through thousands of interconnected consciousness nodes. The peaceful collective beings analyzed every word and gesture for signs of genuine compassion and understanding. They were particularly interested in how Judge Clark balanced individual accountability with social healing. The Vailtar had been deeply troubled by reports of human violence and discrimination throughout the colonial territories. Their collective consciousness found it difficult to understand how individual humans could treat each other with cruelty when cooperation was clearly more beneficial for everyone. Judge Clark's approach suggested that humans might be capable of evolving beyond their primitive competitive instincts. The Vailtar sent a complex data packet to their homeworld, containing detailed analysis of the legal proceedings. Their message indicated cautious optimism about human potential, but emphasized the need for continued monitoring of human social development. They were particularly interested in whether Judge Clark's example would influence other human leaders. Back on the Galactic Council station orbiting the galaxy's political center, 12 different species monitored the New Terra Colony proceedings as part of their evaluation of humanity's expansion application. The diversity of alien perspectives created a rich dialogue about human potential and the challenges of integrating a young species into galactic civilization. The insectoid Hydra representatives appreciated Judge Clark's systematic approach to gathering evidence and analyzing testimony. Their species valued logical decision-making and careful attention to detail. They noted that the human judge was following proper legal procedures despite the personal nature of the case. The aquatic Delmari observers were impressed by the emotional intelligence that Judge Clark displayed in understanding both Marcus Brown's background and the victim's experiences. Their empathic abilities allowed them to sense the genuine feelings of remorse and understanding that were developing in the courtroom. they saw potential for human emotional growth. The silicon-based Teclon entities focused on the efficiency and effectiveness of the legal process. They calculated that Judge Clark's approach was likely to produce better long-term outcomes than purely punitive measures. Their analysis suggested that humans might be capable of learning from mistakes and improving their social systems. However, not all alien observers were impressed with what they saw. The militant Scarth Empire representatives noted that humans still struggled with basic concepts of equality and justice that more advanced species had mastered millennia ago. They questioned whether humans were ready for the responsibilities that came with galactic citizenship. The Reptilian Nexus Confederation observers were concerned about human unpredictability and their tendency toward violence. They pointed out that Marcus Brown's discriminatory behavior reflected deeper problems in human society that might not be easily solved through legal reforms. They recommended limiting human expansion until these issues were resolved. The most influential observers were the ancient Praetal Ascendancy representatives who had guided galactic civilization for over 50,000 years. These wise beings had seen many younger species struggle with the transition to galactic citizenship. They recognized that humans were at a critical point in their development where they could either evolve toward true civilization or remain trapped in primitive social patterns. The Praetal were particularly interested in Judge Clark because his genetic enhancements represented humanity's first steps toward transcending biological limitations. They saw potential for humans to develop beyond their current state, but knew that social evolution was often more difficult than biological or technological advancement. As the proceedings continued, the alien observers exchanged information and perspectives through secure diplomatic channels. A consensus was emerging that Judge Clark represented the best of human potential, but that individuals like Marcus Brown showed how far humans still had to progress. The decision would influence not just the immediate case, but humanity's entire future among the stars. Deep in the Galactic Council archives, artificial intelligence systems recorded every detail of the proceedings for future reference. The Marcus Brown case would become part of the permanent record of human social development and would be studied by scholars for generations to come. The implications of Judge Clark's decision would ripple through galactic civilization for centuries. On New Terra Colony, most humans were unaware of the alien attention focused on their small courtroom. They saw the case as a local matter involving police misconduct and civil rights. Only a few individuals like Judge Clark understood that they were participating in a test that would determine humanity's place in the galaxy. The alien observers continued their silent vigil as Judge Clark prepared to announce his decision. Each species brought different values and perspectives to their evaluation, but all recognized that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in human history. The young species that had recently ventured into space was about to show whether it possessed the wisdom and justice necessary for true galactic citizenship. Ambassador Cathara made final notes about the proceedings and prepared to transmit her recommendations to the Zephyrian High Council. War leader Thokmar reviewed his assessment of human leadership potential and considered new proposals for military cooperation. The Vailtar consensus mind processed the emotional and social implications of everything they had observed. In the courtroom, Judge Clark looked out at the assembled observers and knew that his words would be heard far beyond New Terra Colony. The decision he was about to announce would echo through the galactic community and would help determine whether humans would be welcomed as equals among the stars or would remain isolated in their small corner of space. Judge Ethan Clark stood behind his bench and looked out at the packed courtroom, where every seat was filled with observers waiting to hear his decision. The silence was complete as he gathered his papers and prepared to deliver a ruling that would affect not only Marcus Brown's future but humanity's reputation throughout the galaxy. Clark's voice was clear and steady as he began to speak about the principles that guided colonial justice. He explained that the law existed to protect all citizens equally, and that those who enforced the law had special responsibilities to uphold the highest standards of conduct. He said that police officers who violated these standards damaged the foundation of civilized society. The judge reviewed the evidence that had been presented during the hearing and confirmed that Marcus Brown had violated the civil rights of 3 different citizens. He explained that these violations were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior that could not be ignored or excused. The law required accountability for such actions. However, Judge Clark also acknowledged that Marcus Brown's behavior was influenced by factors beyond his personal character. He spoke about the social and economic conditions that had shaped Marcus's worldview, and the inadequate training that had failed to prepare him for the complexities of colonial policing. He said that true justice required addressing root causes as well as individual accountability. Clark explained that the purpose of criminal justice was not just punishment but also rehabilitation and prevention. He said that society benefited more from reforming wrongdoers than from simply removing them. However, he emphasized that rehabilitation required genuine commitment to change from the person being sentenced. The judge then addressed Marcus Brown directly and asked him to stand as he delivered his decision. Marcus rose from his chair feeling nervous but also strangely hopeful about what he might hear. Judge Clark's approach throughout the hearing had been firm but fair, and Marcus sensed that the judge was trying to find a path forward, rather than simply ending his career. Judge Clark announced that he was finding Marcus Brown guilty of civil rights violations and abuse of authority. He explained that these were serious charges that normally resulted in termination from law enforcement and possible criminal prosecution. However, he said that the unique circumstances of the case justified a different approach that focused on education and community service. The judge sentenced Marcus to 6 months of supervised community service working with enhanced human families in the outer settlements of New Terra Colony. He would be required to attend weekly counseling sessions to address his biases and prejudices, and would participate in extensive training about civil rights law and proper police procedures. Marcus would also be required to write a formal apology to each of his victims and to participate in community meetings where he would discuss his experiences and the lessons he had learned. Judge Clark explained that public accountability was an important part of the healing process for both Marcus and the community. However, the judge also offered Marcus a choice that would determine his future in law enforcement. He could accept full responsibility for his actions and commit to genuine personal change, or he could face immediate termination and possible criminal charges. The choice had to be made immediately and could not be reversed later. Judge Clark explained that this decision reflected humanity's greatest strength, which was not their technology or their military power, but their capacity for recognizing mistakes and choosing to grow beyond them. He said that individuals who could acknowledge their failures and work to overcome them were valuable members of society who deserved opportunities for redemption. The judge also addressed the broader implications of the case for New Terra Colony and for humanity's future among the stars. He explained that alien species were watching how humans handled internal conflicts, and that discriminatory behavior damaged humanity's reputation throughout the galaxy. He said that every citizen had a responsibility to work toward a more just and equal society. Marcus Brown stood quietly for several moments as he considered his options. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom watching him, and knew that his decision would be remembered long after the hearing ended. The choice between easy escape and difficult personal growth was not really a choice at all. Marcus looked directly at Judge Clark and spoke in a clear voice that carried throughout the courtroom. He accepted full responsibility for his actions and committed to doing whatever was necessary to become a better person and a better police officer. He thanked the judge for offering him a path toward redemption rather than simply ending his career. Judge Clark nodded approvingly and explained that Marcus's real work was just beginning. He said that changing deeply held beliefs and behaviors was one of the most difficult challenges that any person could face. However, he expressed confidence that Marcus had the strength and integrity to succeed if he remained committed to the process. The judge then addressed the victims of Marcus's misconduct and apologized on behalf of the colonial justice system for the violations they had suffered. He promised that steps would be taken to prevent similar incidents in the future, and that their experiences would contribute to important reforms in police training and supervision. Carl Davis, Linda Torres, and Peter Kim each spoke briefly about their willingness to participate in Marcus's rehabilitation process. They said that they were more interested in preventing future discrimination than in seeking revenge for past wrongs. Their gracious responses impressed everyone in the courtroom and demonstrated the kind of forgiveness that made healing possible. Judge Clark announced that he would personally monitor Marcus's progress and would meet with him monthly to discuss his community service and counseling. He said that the success of this rehabilitation approach would influence how similar cases were handled in the future. Marcus would be helping to establish precedents for restorative justice. On New Terra Colony, the judge also announced that he would be working with police leadership to develop new training programs that addressed bias and discrimination more effectively. He said that preventing misconduct was more important than punishing it after the fact. The Marcus Brown case had revealed gaps in police education that needed to be filled immediately. Lieutenant Rodriguez stood up and thanked Judge Clark for his wisdom and fairness in handling the case. He said that the police department was committed to supporting Marcus's rehabilitation and to implementing the reforms that the judge had recommended. He promised that lessons learned from this case would improve law enforcement throughout the colony. As the hearing concluded, observers began filing out of the courtroom discussing what they had witnessed. Many were impressed by Judge Clark's innovative approach to justice and by Marcus Brown's willingness to accept responsibility for his actions. The case had shown that even serious conflicts could be resolved through understanding and commitment to positive change. Ambassador Cathara sent an immediate message to the Zephyrian High Council, praising the proceedings and recommending increased cooperation with New Terra Colony. War leader Thokmar made similar recommendations to the Korathi leadership based on the honor and integrity he had observed. The Vailtar consensus mind expressed cautious optimism about human potential for social evolution. Marcus Brown left the courthouse feeling both humbled and hopeful about his future. He knew that the next 6 months would be difficult, and that changing his fundamental attitudes would require constant effort. However, he also felt grateful for the opportunity to make amends for his mistakes and to become the kind of person he had always wanted to be. Judge Clark remained in the courtroom after everyone else had left, thinking about the implications of his decision. He had chosen to believe in humanity's capacity for growth and redemption rather than simply punishing failure. Time would tell whether his faith in human potential was justified, but he felt confident that he had made the right choice for both Marcus Brown and for society as a whole. 6 months after the hearing that changed his life, Marcus Brown walked through the outer settlements of New Terra Colony with a group of enhanced human children who were eager to show him their school project about interspecies cooperation. The transformation in both Marcus and the community around him had been remarkable and had attracted attention from across the galaxy. Marcus had completed his community service requirement, but had chosen to continue working as a volunteer, liaison between the police department and enhanced human families. His weekly counseling sessions had helped him understand the deep roots of his prejudices and had given him tools for recognizing and challenging biased thinking. The change in his behavior was obvious to everyone who knew him. The children Marcus worked with had originally been suspicious of him because they knew about his past mistakes. However, his genuine commitment to learning and growing had won them over, and they now saw him as a trusted friend and protector. Their parents had also noticed the change, and several families had written letters praising Marcus's dedication to the community. Lieutenant Rodriguez had been so impressed by Marcus's transformation that he had promoted him to a new position as head of community relations for the police department. Marcus now spent his time training other officers about bias recognition and building bridges between law enforcement and minority communities. His personal experience with discrimination gave him credibility that no textbook could provide. The police training programs that Judge Clark had recommended were now being used throughout the colonial territory and had significantly reduced complaints about officer misconduct. Other human colonies had requested copies of the New Terra model and were implementing similar reforms in their own law enforcement agencies. Marcus's case had become a catalyst for positive change across human space. Judge Clark had also experienced major changes in his career and responsibilities. 3 months after the hearing, he had received an appointment to the Galactic Council's Human Integration Committee, where he would help establish policies for human expansion into new star systems. The appointment was based partly on his handling of the Marcus Brown case, which had impressed alien observers throughout the galaxy. The Integration Committee was responsible for evaluating humanity's readiness for expanded galactic citizenship and for developing frameworks that would allow humans to interact safely and peacefully with other species. Judge Clark's expertise in both human and alien law made him uniquely qualified for this challenging role. Clark had also been asked to serve as humanity's representative on the Interspecies Justice Council, where he would help develop legal standards that could be applied across different species and cultures. His work on New Terra Colony had demonstrated that justice could bridge the gaps between different groups and create understanding where there had been conflict. The success of the rehabilitation approach used in Marcus's case had influenced legal thinking throughout human space and had attracted positive attention from alien legal scholars. Several species had expressed interest in learning more about restorative justice techniques and had invited human legal experts to share their experiences. Most importantly, the Galactic Council had approved humanity's application for expansion into 3 new star systems based partly on the reforms implemented on New Terra Colony. The approval came with specific praise for humanity's demonstrated commitment to internal justice and equality and for their willingness to learn from mistakes and implement positive changes. The Zephyrian High Council had been particularly impressed by the case and had offered to share advanced social technologies that could help human colonies eliminate discrimination more quickly. Ambassador Kethera had become a strong advocate for human expansion and had recommended New Terra Colony as a model for other human settlements. The Korathi military leadership had also responded positively to the changes they observed and had offered to establish a joint training facility on New Terra Colony where human and Korathi officers could learn from each other. War leader Thokmar had praised Judge Clark's leadership and had recommended closer military cooperation between their species. The Veiltar Consensus Mind had expressed satisfaction with humanity's progress toward true social harmony and had agreed to establish a medical research facility on New Terra Colony. Their advanced healing technologies would be shared with humans in exchange for opportunities to study human social development and conflict resolution techniques. Other alien species had also taken notice of the positive changes on New Terra Colony and several had established diplomatic missions there. The colony was becoming a showcase for human potential and a demonstration that young species could evolve rapidly when given proper guidance and motivation. The economic benefits of improved interspecies relations were already becoming apparent as New Terra Colony attracted investment and trade partnerships that had been impossible before the reforms. The colony's reputation for fairness and justice was attracting immigrants from other human settlements and was contributing to rapid population growth. Marcus Brown often reflected on how much his life had changed since that night at the fuel station when he had arrested Judge Clark. The anger and prejudice that had once defined his worldview had been replaced by understanding and compassion. He had learned that enhanced humans were not his enemies but his fellow citizens who deserved the same respect and protection that he wanted for himself. The relationship between Marcus and Judge Clark had evolved from adversarial to collaborative as they worked together on various community projects. They had become unlikely friends who shared a commitment to justice and social progress. Their partnership had become a symbol of how personal growth and forgiveness could overcome even serious conflicts. Judge Clark had invited Marcus to accompany him to several interspecies conferences where they presented their story as an example of human capacity for positive change. Alien delegates were consistently impressed by their ability to move beyond past conflicts and work together toward common goals. The story of their case had been studied in law schools throughout human space and had become a standard example of how justice could be used to heal rather than simply punish. Young lawyers and police officers learned about the importance of addressing root causes of misconduct rather than just responding to symptoms. As Marcus walked with the children through the settlement, he looked up at the sky where ships from a dozen different species traveled between the stars on missions of trade diplomacy and exploration. He knew that his small role in improving human society had contributed to opening those opportunities for his species. The children pointed excitedly at a Zephyrian transport ship that was landing at the spaceport carrying medical supplies and educational materials for the colony. They talked about their dreams of traveling to other worlds and meeting alien species in person. Marcus smiled as he realized that their futures would be much brighter because humans had learned to treat each other with dignity and respect. Judge Clark was at that moment meeting with representatives from the Galactic Council to discuss humanity's next application for expansion rights. The meeting was taking place in the same courthouse where Marcus had been tried 6 months earlier. The irony was not lost on either man that a place where justice had been served was now hosting discussions about humanity's galactic future. As the sun set over New Terra Colony, Marcus Brown and Judge Ethan Clark looked up at the stars with pride and hope for what lay ahead. Their personal journey from conflict to cooperation had become part of a larger story about humanity's growth from a young primitive species to a respected member of galactic civilization. The future among the stars was brighter because they had chosen understanding over prejudice and redemption over revenge.